So we have the story out of Berlin that I think is a good segue. Berliners vote to expropriate large landlords in non-binding referendum. Non-binding, okay, I don't know if that really means anything's going to be accomplished, but they do say in the Reuters article that they say campaigners hope the city will take control of some 240,000 apartments. That is to say, they probably won't. But you have people in Berlin who are voting that these big companies that own, I think it's 550,000 apartment units, lose control of that, and the public gains control of it. And the way I see it is, it doesn't matter if it's the private sector or the public sector. When power is centralized, you will get tyranny. So what we've been seeing in the U.S. is like that BlackRock fiasco. I don't know if you saw a lot about it. These large private investment firms buying up all the houses, offering up insane sums of money. Like there'll be a $200,000 house and a family will be like, we'll pay 200. And then some firm will come in and say, we'll do 230 because we can and we're rich and we know the value is going to go up because we're buying it all. You get to that point and you're like, okay, these massive out of control private entities need to have some kind of regulation or antitrust. On the other hand, what you see instead is that in Berlin, they're like, the government should take all of them, replacing one centralized authority with another. So I don't know. I thought this was interesting for you, especially being, a Mises Institute economist. What's your view on dealing with massive out of control private organizations that are seizing the commons versus, the left solution, which is government?
Sure. So you had the key phrase there, you said out of control. So probably if you had asked me that 20 years ago, I would have said, oh, well, in a free market, it's good that a private corporation, if they buy it, it's not in their interest to buy it if the price is going to crash later, because then they lose money. So they only buy it if they think it's going to go up. And then that, rationally allocates housing to the highest bidder. And that would all be true so long as they respected property rights and there was no, bailouts of them when they get caught with their pants down. But as we see in practice, that isn't what happened. Like, the housing boom years, you could say of a lot of those investors, why are they making such crazy, why are banks giving loans to people that they know, they call them liar loans. They knew some of those mortgages that they were going to people who lied on the application. Why? And when you push it, ultimately, it's largely because, they knew they were going to get bailed out. That, Greenspan and then Bernanke, he wouldn't let the whole system go down. And so there were things like that in place. So I agree with you. In the real world, the problem with big companies doing that is because it's not just promoting efficiency, because if they make a mistake, a lot of times taxpayers have to bail them out or the Federal Reserve. And so, yeah, you're right. The way to solve that problem is not to then empower the government even more, because they're ultimately the ones that, keep that corrupt system in place.
Yeah, that's what's funny. It's like we were talking about this in the previous segment, that the government comes in and says, we're going to fire all the nurses. Oh, no, what do we do? Oh, well, I guess we'll send in the National Guard. It's like, well, you chose to do all of those things. So you destroy the economy, then say, here's my solution. It's like you punch the guy in the face and offer him the first aid kit. It's like, no, that's not acceptable. You can't do that. And in this capacity, you get these, I can't speak for Germany, but in the U.S., my understanding was that a lot of these large investment firms were getting bank loans and government funding and Fed dollars, were buying up the property, and their attitude was like, we don't care, we'll get bailed out if it screws up, so we're stealing from you no matter what.
Right, exactly. So yeah, in a genuine free market, I would have no problem in principle with them doing it, because the only reason they would buy it is if they think the price is going to go higher, and it's in their interest to not be consistently wrong about that. And if the price does go higher, then they did a service by reserving that for the person who wanted it more down the road. But you're right.
But what do you do if one company owns 80% of the property, and the more property they own, the more profit they generate, the more property they buy, until eventually one company owns all the houses in a city or something?
Okay, so again, so long as they're not violating contracts, and they're not, stealing from people or whatever, that they're just buying, and then they're respecting, the title that they actually acquired legitimately. The only way they could capture such market share is if somehow they're outcompeting all the other, speculators and housing developers who are trying to do that. So they're like, back in the day, the reason Rockefeller got so big was he genuinely came up with efficiencies and delivered kerosene and, petroleum at lower prices. And so then later, people could argue they did stuff with their money that they shouldn't have, that wasn't a market outcome. But originally, that's how he beat his competitors. So per se, I don't have a problem with that. So if some company just starts taking over because, they're really good at saying, no, this property is going to go up, and they have a better eye for real estate, I wouldn't want them to stop doing that. But yeah, I mean,
certainly at some point, you just have a multi-billion-dollar fund saying, I don't care if it goes up, I'll buy it anyway because I can, because it doesn't affect our bottom line, and the more property you have, the better. And in fact, once they control a substantive portion of the market, can't they then manipulate the market? Like, would there need to be a point at which the government can do something?
So I would reject the idea that at some point they don't care. Like, I don't think Warren Buffett buys stocks and says, I don't care whether they go up or down because I'm so rich. Now, you're right. He might be able, because he's so big now, to do things like the fear fact that he's, likes his stock, that might make the price go up. And so that does kind of change, the analysis.
It's definitely true they don't care. It's not that they don't care about, like I'm saying they're like, oh no, I'm going to lose money, but don't care. It's mostly that they're like, look, if I can afford to buy 10 houses, yeah, one of them might go down, but whatever. Like I'm going to diversify. I'm going to buy as much as I can and hope that overall, out of my 10 houses, 6 gain in value. And if the 4 that go down, hopefully the gains outweigh the losses. So then you'll end up with someone saying, you know what, this might be a risky buy, but I can handle the risk because I've got such massive wealth from all the property I own already. I can take the risk. A regular person can't do that. So then you end up with an organization that can come in and say, $200,000 house for this middle class working, this working family. We'll give you 210, and then the seller is going to be like, 210's better for me. But then what happens when the middle class doesn't own any wealth? They can't transfer anything to their kids. You end up with like Chinese style state communism.
So I suppose to go back, you had asked me, at some point, is it justified for the state to come in? And so I guess what I would say is, we can quibble about scenarios where even I might say, yeah, that makes me uncomfortable, but to me, you don't make things better by saying, let's have, those people in Washington, because we can trust them to do the right thing. And I know you're not saying that, but,
right.
The same people that are doing all this stuff that we're talking about with the National Guard and the, vaccine mandates and whatnot, they're not going to come in and all of a sudden be on their best behavior when it comes to regulating the housing sector. Like, they're the ones who are behind the bailouts in the first place. I'm
saying, is antitrust feasible? The problem I see with the Berlin thing is like the government just taking the houses is the same problem as the corporations having the houses. The only difference is who you're yelling at. But what if they said, hey, we're gonna put a limit on how much property you can own, or something like that, or perhaps it's like you're a special case. You are the one company that owns 60% of the properties. We think that's too much, so we're gonna antitrust you. We're gonna break you up. Like, what's your thoughts on that?
So Tom DiLorenzo's done a lot of good stuff on this if people want to look him up on antitrust. So I don't have the statistics off the top of my head, but I think it's true that in the vast majority of actual antitrust lawsuits are brought by the competitors of like the dominant firm. So it's not, some disinterested civic rights organization, guys that are, just doing this and they're getting money from contributors or something around the country. It's the competitors who try to bring them down. And also, there were plenty of cases where companies were viewed as untouchable, behemoths that then just collapsed. Like IBM, there was a period where they just dominated, and no one who could ever touch IBM. And then Microsoft came along, and then who could possibly touch Microsoft? And then Google came. No one can touch Google. You know what I'm saying? So a lot of times, like the stuff gets hung up in the antitrust lawsuit, and the company loses market share just because of market forces. I
mean, to be fair, those examples are just escalating tyranny, though. IBM was making computers. People used computers. They're like, that's a great utility. Microsoft came along, and then things started to get a little shady with how they were running their business. Apple comes along, similar things. And now we're at the point where Google is just overtly evil and censoring news, censoring conversations, stopping regular people from being able to have conversations. It's to the point where Google got so powerful that no one can even rise up to challenge them, because if you're a politician, or the Mises Institute is a good example. Wikipedia says you guys are, it smears you in ridiculous ways. We're at the point where these institutions have become so powerful and untouchable that they can outright just destroy anyone who would speak up against them to stop them from abusing power. So my view is, I think I definitely lean more towards freedom and everything, but I would say I'm rather centrist in the economic scale, simply because while I don't think the government owning land is going to improve things for the working class, I think centralization of authority and power, regardless of whether it's government or corporation, is a bad thing. And so how do you how do you break that apart and decentralize it, especially when, look, Google is untouchable. And as you said, many of these untouchables have waned. I mean, Microsoft is still there, and Bill Gates is buying up all the farmland, so he's certainly retained all that power. Then you've got Apple, which did a really great job of rebranding Unix and selling it back to people for well, let's be real. Ian, Unix was open source, right? It is open source. So he takes a Unix, he brands it, makes it private, sells it for a massive profit. convince a bunch of people that shiny is better, and then I have to deal with people who don't know how to use basic, functions on a PC or run, basic programs because they're using, iPhones and stuff. No offense to the iPhone and Apple users, I'm not a fan. And now you're at the point where once all of that stuff keeps happening, now you get Google, and Google's got its tentacles in everything to the point where you're a conservative talk show host and they delete your video because you cited the CDC. That's Steven Crowder. So now if you can't even speak up against them in any meaningful way, of course we can say Google's bad like on this show. But what if you actually want to challenge their goals and agendas or something that might affect their profits? All of a sudden now they're coming after you. They're going to censor you. Now you can't even do anything to stop it.
I'm seeing now that Unix might actually be closed source and that Linus Torvald reverse engineered it and created Linux, which is open source. I don't know. I thought it was open source.
Okay, my info on that Apple stuff is probably
it's
wrong,
kind of vague.
So apologies, Apple.
Thanks, guys.
So yeah, I definitely agree with you that what Google's doing right now is they're not living up to their motto, right?
They got rid of that motto.
It's
they get rid of it?
It's Alphabet. It's good. They own Google.
Okay.
Right.
Yeah,
Alphabet is
Alphabet's
like crazy technology.
overtly
X.
evil.
Sorry to
Quantum
interrupt.
computing. They're gonna. I mean, we live under the boot of Zuckerberg and Alphabet. Bill Gates.
Yeah, so I do think that 30, 40 years from now, it's not just going to be politicians that we're going to think that the humans of that era are going to think are the ones like running the world. It will be like a fusion of big, multi-billion-dollar corporations and then powerful states, and it'll be more of a hybrid thing, and that will be considered like the center of oppression.
Chinese style
yes.
capitalism or communism or
Sure.
state communism. I don't know.
Right, whatever term you want to
fusion,
use.
Yeah.
So that thing. All I would say, though, is the way to slow the movement towards that is not to give, the Department of Justice more power to break up companies. So it's a modest point that I'm making. I'm more just, saying this is not the path. But
I've been thinking a lot that politics is not what we think it is anymore. It's not Democrats, Republicans. I mentioned this before the show. That's the skin suit of politics. Politics now is computer software code. It's deciding what we see, how we behave, who we interact with. So we need to rewrite the code if we want to control and change the politics. It's not going to happen from Washington. It's going to be a decentralized movement, and it kind of is.
Well, that's a great point. I think politics as we see it right now is a facade. When you can't even go on social media to the public square, to the water cooler and say, here is my political opinion, then there is no democracy. There is no democratic institution. It's quite literally, we've mentioned this before. Imagine it this way. We get locked down. We're told we can't go to bars. We can't go to restaurants. So no one's talking to each other. How are we communicating? On Twitter. What is Twitter doing? Twitter was censoring news that harmed Joe Biden's campaign. So when you have the interests of a private corporation saying, we can control what you see and hear, your politics, your vote, completely meaningless. There could be large swaths, and there probably are, of people in this country with a very particular political opinion, and they're going to be like, oh, I can't bring that up because, if I try, I'll get censored, so I'll opt not to say it. Out of sight, out of mind. There's that saying from Harriet Tubman. I believe it was Harriet Tubman. Or I believe it's a real quote, could be apocryphal. I have freed many slaves. I would have freed many more if only they knew they were slaves. Mm-hmm. If people don't know what they don't know, it just never comes up. And so when you see Twitter censoring the Hunter Biden story, that overtly benefited the Biden campaign. So how can we say that we have any kind of real political system if that's what we're living under? And I agree with you. Giving the government power is no guarantee. They're not going to solve it.
Right.
We could cross our fingers and be like, well, what if we said, okay, you can break up these companies? They say, oh, okay, we'll break up all the enemies of Twitter. So Twitter becomes the dominant company, and you look at what they do to Parler, what they do to Gab. The government will just use their power to benefit their collaborators in the private sector.
Right, exactly. And so I don't have a great answer for, okay, well, then what do we do? So for sure, though, I just want to be clear. I'm not saying, hey, they're a private company. They do whatever they want. Like that's not what I'm saying. But I am saying that let's be realistic. Partly, why these corporations do pose a threat is because they're in league with states that have, armies and prisons behind them and, monopoly printing presses. So you're not going to like empowering one to, keep the others in check. That's certainly not a good solution.
Yeah. So
we'll probably have like a Starlink decentralized internet that's runs parallel with this corporate internet, and then we'll be able to have like decentralized finance. The problem is the military. If the government controls the military, it's kind of like we are the government. So we give these people authority to make commands for us, but we don't have to do that. this governor in New York that was like, I have signed paperwork to give myself the power. No,
like
that
the most
paper
ridiculous statement ever.
Power is granted. It is not.
Yeah. Going back to what you were saying, Tim, my friend took a picture on a New York City subway. I think I'm getting this right. And it was a 3-pane thing. You know, it's from like the CDC or something, or the New York version of the Board of Health. And the first pane showed 2 people talking without masks on.
Yeah, I saw that.
And it said bad. And then the middle pane showed them
Right.
talking with a mask better. And then the best was them texting each other. And
Yep.
to me, that had nothing to do with transmission of a virus. That had to do with get people talking through the thing that you're right. They control the flow of information.
I have just written a decree granting myself the power to declare Ian must make me a loaf of bread.
Oh, I thought you were going keto, but I can't defy that order.
I'm not going to eat the bread. Isn't that insane?
I grant you that power.
If you can just declare you have the power to do it, don't you have the power to do it the entire time? That's how insane this is.
They're voted into office to represent us and can be voted out at any moment.
But they just
Mic drop.
That's
The thing is the military. The thing is the military and satellite intervention. If they can watch you from above and see if you're farming on your land and then come in with military, that's messed up.
So where does this all lead to? I mean, this is probably one of the most pessimistic, conversations we've had in a while. It's like, Ian, you make a good point about politics is not what we think it is. Yeah, that's kind of just distracting us. I feel like that's the bread in the circus, where it's like, who's going to win the election? Woo, you can pick of our approved candidates. And you get the Republican who says, well, wait a little bit. And the Democrat who says, burn it all down. And then what happens is you vote for the Republicans and they go, oh, okay, we're going to resist. We'll be sleeping over there. You get the Democrat and they're like, great, time to start knocking stuff over. So there's no real resistance at all. And I think that's why they just absolutely despise Marjorie Taylor Greene and Lauren Boebert. Not to say that they're, changing the game either. Maybe they're just louder voices, but still not enough to actually make a difference here.
Right, and I think that explains just the hostility to Trump, whether people love him or hate him, that he was so out of the mainstream, like he actually was not playing the game according to the standard rules. Like normally the Republicans are like, we're so sorry, we're so sexist and racist, but please, give us a chance because we're better on economics than them. And Trump was not playing that game and was going around, and so that's why it was just code red establishment in both parties. National Review had a whole issue against Trump. I think some people forget that Conservative Inc. was not pro-Trump in the beginning. They didn't like him either. He was too much of a wild card, and whatever, he wasn't playing the game that they had wanted to play too. So, and I'm not singing praises to Trump. I'm just saying that you could see how the system is what it is, and they like that. Yep, here's 2 candidates, and it's shade of gray or a shade of gray this way. Choose, and now you're free because you got to pick a person every 4 years. And to me, that's why now I think states breaking away or cities or what have you is the only near-term to mid-term way to do anything.
It has to be super subtle, because if they think that you're breaking away, they'll come in with a boot. But if you just do it with parallel systems that synergize, I think it can happen.
Thanks for checking out this clip from the Timcast IRL podcast. If you want to see the full show, come back to this channel, youtube.com/TimcastIRL, Monday through Friday at 8 p.m., where you can leave comments and super chat, and we actually will read your comments on the show. Don't forget to like, share, subscribe, and if you want exclusive members-only content, segments you can't get anywhere else, go to timcast.com, become a member, and we even have full bonus episodes. Thanks for hanging out, and we'll see you all next time.